Welcome to Tendoc Discusses the Power Rangers role-playing game. This video is going to be a little different than the other 5 that I've done because I was able to attend one of the Twitch streams that Renegade Games put out about how to make a character in the game, and I was able to ask questions directly about some of the things that I found in the system. So I am excited to announce that I have some actual answers for some of the things that I was wondering about. And with that, let's get into it. First, martial arts. Martial arts is a staple of the Power Rangers universe. But in this system, may not be the best way to handle your enemies. It depends on what you're trying to do. Martial arts on their own do not inflict damage. They inflict stun. Both strength-based martial arts and speed-based martial arts both inflict stun 1 when you hit someone with it. And that number is not damage. That number is the number of rounds that they are denied their move action. So if you're a character with a low enough speed where you only have a move action and you get stunned 1, then there is nothing you can do on your turn. You're not helpless, as in the condition, but you can't move, you can't take a standard, there are no free actions, etc. After it gets back to the turn who stunned you, 1 level of stun goes away. So you can have multiple levels of stun. If you are a Yellow Ranger and you use your triple strike ability to hit someone 3 times, then effectively they've taken stun 3 because they got stun 1 3 times. What that means is on their turn, they have stun 3, they can't do anything, it gets back to your turn, or the Yellow Ranger's turn, and now they're at stun 2 because they recovered a little bit. If they don't get hit again, 1 more round later, they're at stun 1, and then 1 more round later, they're at stun 0, and now they can take their full turn again. There is a small caveat to this rule, which we'll discuss in a moment. You can do blunt 1 damage with a martial arts strike, but you have to take a downshift penalty. And if you're using strength-based martial arts, it's actually a 2-shift penalty. If you are using speed-based martial arts, it is a 1-shift penalty. So it's harder to force damage on your target. If you critical hit when attacking a target, they take double the amount of damage. So if it was blunt 1, now they are taking blunt 2. And if you're doing stun, instead of being stunned for 1 round, you are stunned for 2. Now let's get back to that special rule that I said I would get back to. If you stun something, and it only has as much health as you stunned it for a number of rounds, it's taken out of the conflict. So if you have 1 hit point and you get stun 1'd, you fall unconscious or taken out of the fight. If you have 2 hit points and you get stun 2'd, you fall down. If you have 3 hit points, stun 3, etc., etc., etc. Now, reaching 0 hit points or getting hit with stun so that it matches your hit points doesn't mean you're dead necessarily, but it does mean you're out of the fight. It could mean you're unconscious. It could mean your corporeal form evaporated, or whatever it means for a creature of a certain type to reach 0 hit points or get a number of stun equal to their hit points. It doesn't really matter. It just means you're out of the conflict for the rest of the scene, the rest of the encounter. We also got some clarity on critical hits. First, when you score a critical hit, and I'll talk about how to do that in a second, when you score a critical hit, you can choose either to apply your attack effect again, or if your attack has an alternative effect, you can activate that instead. So, if you strike someone with a fist and do stun 1 and you crit, you can choose to do stun 1 again, meaning they take stun 2. Or if your punch had an alternative effect, and I suppose blunt 1 would count, you could do that instead. So you do stun 1 and you also do blunt 1 because your alternative effect kicked in. Don't quote me on that though, because I'm not sure that's the kind of alternative effect that they mean, because some weapons have 2 effects in their primary that you choose from, and they might mean that, because the secondary effect is a column all unto itself, and sometimes that alternative effect is completely different from the primary effect, and it wouldn't make sense for those things to kick off. Like, for instance, if you're using a power bow, its primary effect is it hits somebody and does damage. Its alternative effect is you target 2 people and do damage. So if you crit targeting 1 person with your bow, it doesn't make sense that you now get to target 2 people. And that example actually did come up during the stream, and it was ruled that you couldn't choose to affect multiple targets after using an attack that only targeted 1. So I don't think it works that way. I do think the GM, the Game Master, has to make a judgment call in that case, but basically use your logic. If you were only targeting 1 thing, you can't choose to target 2 now, but if your attack does stun and it has an alternative effect where it could hurt, you could do that. But that would indicate that the same punch both stunned and hurt. Actually, that does kind of make sense. So it depends. And also, we got some clarity on critical hits. Now, I've had this suspicion for a while, but it was finally confirmed. You cannot crit on your D20, and you cannot crit on your D2. Because a D20 is not counted as skill dice. A D2 is, but it specifically in the book says you can't crit using that. And I can see why, because it would be an incredible 50% crit rate. You can only crit on the D4, 6, 8, 10, or 12. And finally having confirmation on that from the game developers it makes more sense to me now. I did ask about power armor, because the power armor that you get for being a Power Ranger in the Ranger section seems to say one thing, and then when you go to power armor in the equipment, it mentions a whole bunch of stuff that aren't in the game and has bonuses that don't match up to what Rangers get. And they basically said, this is Essence 20 is a universal system. Because of that, some things need to be in this book that don't necessarily make sense for Power Rangers, but make sense for G.I. Joe, or make sense for Transformers. And the example that I use specifically is I asked them about the silent ability that is on Power Ranger clothes, or just clothes in the Power Rangers RPG system. It makes mention that armor without the silent perk gives you a penalty on infiltration skills. And the example they gave was armor with toughness 2, evasion 2 would give you a 4 downshift. And I mentioned there's nothing in the game so far that gives evasion armor bonus, and that's when they mentioned G.I. Joe. So, okay, that makes sense. So this whole book was written kind of generically, and then afterward, Power Ranger stuff was applied. Or they were all designed together, and all of it was left in the book because it's a universal system, kind of. And then there were a couple stray questions about Zords, but apparently there is going to be a whole stream dedicated to Zords, so we didn't really focus on asking too many more questions. We did point out that the Zord movement rates didn't seem quite right, and recreating Zords that are already in the book using the Zord creation rules didn't really match up either, but they'll go over it later. And then lastly, we brought up the monster block, where some monsters are using unarmed attacks, but it does blunt 1 and not stun. And I asked, in the case of a putty, for instance, it says that they're trained in martial arts and they do a D4. I asked, they do blunt damage, so does that mean that the D4 already takes into account that they took a penalty? And they said, for convenience on the GM, just assume that whatever is in the monster block is exactly what it does. In other words, just assume they already downshift and that D4 reflects that. I'm okay with that. So I'm super excited to have answers, and I can't wait for them to talk more. Also, a note, if you bought the Power Rangers game already and got the free PDF, re-download it. They've updated it. The only difference that I could tell was that there was an error in the Zord character sheet where it lists the initiative skill 3 times. That has been updated, so it does not do that anymore. It had, instead of initiative 3 times, it's, I think, brawn, dodge, and initiative, or brawn, might, and initiative, something like that. But the PDF might still get updates periodically, so go back to the Renegade main page if you purchase from Renegade. Go to where the download to the PDF is and re-download your PDF, because if you downloaded it from day one, there's going to be errors in there that are not in the newest version. And you can tell because the file name is different and of the change that I just mentioned. So do that. Stay up to date. Go to the Renegade website, re-download the PDF. Stay tuned for more.